I'm going to talk to you a bit about operations, which when I started writing this, I was reminded of a t-shirt I used to have. And it said, being an operations manager is easy. It's like riding a bike, except the bike's on fire, you're on fire, everything's on fire, and you're in hell. And to be honest, there's a degree of truth to that when you're working on a lot of titles at the same time. And that's really what a lot of operations comes down to, because it's not one title, it's every title. So my job starts with projections, which John briefly mentioned. And a lot of that is to do with looking into what comparable titles there are. Now, that might be the same director, it might be the same genre, it might be looking at what companies like Arrow, Indicator, 88 Films, these great labels, and kind of, have they released similar things? Have they worked? Have they not worked? The Official Charts Company website, which is a industry subscription site, and that has huge amounts of data, and it's incredibly useful to see kind of what's sold and what works and what maybe hasn't worked, because what hasn't worked is often as important as what has, obviously. So I look at those, try and find decent comparables. I'll be honest, when you're trying to find a comparable to cooking price-wise, don't bother. So that one was a little bit more of a educated finger in the air. And then I add in all the other costs. I think John briefly mentioned subtitling, design costs, BBFC, packaging, replication. Now, is that going to be limited edition? That obviously affects the price. So do we think we're going to do a 4K of something with a book, or do we think we're going to do a standard release like that Blu-ray with a booklet? Once all that's done and we see how something's obviously we think it's going to perform, John obviously takes that information and kind of does the deals. And then when we're going to announce it, I start working on product submission forms. Now, that's everything that you see online when we announce a release. Now, obviously, sometimes that can be very much extras TBC. Other times it's going to be, like Chronos, where you can see everything we're going to put on there. So we control sort of the Amazon listings, so we can update Amazon and we can update the BFI shop. I mean, you would think. All the other stuff goes to our sales company, Trinity, who then distribute that to all the retailers, HMV, Zavi, everywhere else. And then we have to update those, which is quite a process. So it's helpful if you don't change things too often, but best laid plans. And then we're into sort of format and packaging. Now, a lot of you are in here are collectors, no doubt, or I hope so. And I'm sure you'll have an opinion about maybe some of these, whether you think it should be separate formats like Watership Down, Blu-ray only, dual format, Blu-ray and DVD. It's a bit difficult because you really can't make everyone happy. I mean, whatever I decide we're going to do, there's going to be someone who's not going to be delighted by it. But, you just have to work on what's going to work best or what we think is going to work best. And 4K UHD, as John mentioned, is growing in popularity. And boutique labels, I think, are really sort of cashing in quite well on UHD, because they're doing these amazing editions of films that not necessarily you'd even think would be on 4K. I'm just curious, actually, who in here is a 4K adopter? Yeah, not surprised. And good, because we're doing more of them, so it's all good. But the thing with 4K, a lot of people come to me and they say, why aren't you doing this? Or why are you doing this 4K? And it's a difficult question, because sometimes I think it's actually quite an easy answer, because you just look at something and go, that is not realistic to do that on 4K. But other times I would love to do these things, but you can't always do it. It just simply is not viable with certain projects. And not everything that's restored in 4K arguably should actually be released on 4K, because there's restorations in 4K and there's very, very, very good ones, and there's less good ones. And, it's all well and good to read that someone's restored something in 4K. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to be released. And we have technical team here who are going to be doing one of these behind the scenes, and I'm sure they'll speak at length about why certain things aren't released and why certain things are. So I'll leave that to the experts. But we do evaluate choices. We do take on board what people come to us with. We did a film called Full Circle, which is a flip side. And we did it as a dual format. It was $29.99 RRP. And there was some negative feedback from people about, well, I don't want 4K and I've got all the flip sides and I don't want to buy this for 30 quid. or 25 quid, because I don't want this format and I'm not interested in it. And those people were quite vocal, and we took that on board, and we decided that for the next release, which I think was Gregory's Girl, we did those as separate formats. So we do take these things on board. We do listen to customers and what they like and what they don't like. So standard packaging, which will be something like Remembrance, is quite simple and straightforward to do from a point of view of the templates. It doesn't require a lot of extra work. A lot of you will probably know about booklets being in first pressings. This is becoming an increasingly common strategy. Eureka have recently done this, I think, like last week, actually put this out about Master Cinema. And there's obviously always some negative feedback about it, but the reality is this is a signifier of the costs involved. I mean, printing booklets is not cheap. Printing booklets initially is not massively expensive, but we're talking about a lifespan of 5 to 7 years for a title. That's a lot of booklets that you actually have to print over that period, and you're selling less and less, and you're making less and less per unit. So if you start just over printing this stuff, you end up at the end of a license period with literally thousands of pieces of print. I mean, to put that in some context, we currently have over 500,000 pieces of print in stock across 554 titles. If you're going limited edition route, so Watership Down, Chantal Ackerman, obviously I have to work out what these are going to cost from a unit perspective, because something like Watership Down costs a lot more than Remembrance. So I have to think about that and work out kind of also the deadlines, which we'll get onto. So that's things like Derek Jarman, Volume 1 and 2, Alan Clark at the BBC, which was a 200-page book, Watership Down, Get Carter, Ingmar Bergman, 1 through 4, which I had the delight of producing also. And then we're into deadlines, which is probably my favourite word at work, spoken with varying degrees of stress. So this shows the production deadlines for Cooking Pricewise, which is obviously out this week. So we've got when we should be receiving and accepting the master. Now that might be something like a Toho project, which we're being delivered that master. That's got nothing to do. It's not a restoration by the BFI. Or it's something like this, where we're accessing the only material that exists for a release like this. But we also still have to look at it and work out, is this actually releasable? I mean, from a technical perspective. And then you've got, as it goes on, different deadlines. Now, BBFC, like I said, is not applicable to this because this is actually exempt. A standard release will have, like a booklet, will have maybe 8,000 words. A book, like Watership Down, is going to be 16 to 20,000 words. That has to be copy edited and we actually have a freelancer that we regularly work with, and I contract them for a certain amount of time, and they come in and do that work. But obviously they have set availability, so you have to make sure that everything's done on time. Otherwise, you've got a copy editor and no copy. So with these sort of quite big limited editions, I mean, a booklet gets printed in a couple of weeks, 10, 12 days maybe. A book takes 4 weeks just to print the book. So you have to adjust these kind of deadlines, because you can't send a book off and expect to get it printed in like 10 days. Well, not well anyway. So I'll liaise quite closely with Vic, who you'll hear from, who's a producer, to make sure that we hit those deadlines and we get everything in. That's extras and booklet content as well. Because missed deadlines, well, they stress me out for one, and they result in release dates being missed. I'm sure you've all had things where you've been disappointed, where things have moved back. Not 2 years, I'll be honest, that doesn't happen a lot. But things do move, and it can be. It's frustrating, and it has a financial implication potentially, depending on what the title is. So, extras wise, budgets wise, Vic's going to speak about that in more detail. But there's a set budget, and when we do the projections that I was talking about, we have a set budget for extras, and we have to try and make sure we don't exceed that, because you can't just, even if it's something you really want to include, you can't just keep putting stuff on releases. If you're only expecting to sell a certain amount as well. So we have to work quite carefully about that. But it's worth noting that sometimes projections can have costs that, thankfully, can be eliminated. So we might have a subtitle cost that I will factor in, and it might be that the licensor does their own subtitling, and they've got them, and they can just send them to us. which is really great. And then that requires a little bit of checking, but not the whole cost of actually brand new subtitling. So we might be able to sort of take that cost and put it somewhere else. So we can say, well, we allocated £1,200 or something, and then we can move that to extras and go, let's get that commentary or let's get that short film. But I'll leave Vic to talk about extras. And then manufacturing, delivery. So Sony DADC manufacture all of our titles, and once the master is signed off, it's sent to Sony, and we order check discs, which is exactly what, I don't know if there's any people here who might review discs. That's the kind of thing you'll be sent, and that should be exactly what goes out in the finished product. Now, a producer is also sent a disc, so I'll send Vic a disc of Cooking Price-Wise, for example, and he'll look at it and he'll give me the thumbs up. Now, obviously, if he spots something that's wrong, that is like a bit of a nightmare, and the production has to cease. We'd have to resupply. That has obviously a lot of implications, but generally speaking, I have to say that's very, very rare that ever happens, thankfully. So once that's approved, I'll place the orders, finished stock, and I'll agree with John what we're going to do with quantities. Talking of first pressings, we might do an average order of a catalogue title. So say like Remembrance is a good example. You would do 2,000 copies probably, with a run on of 1,000 booklets and sleeves. So your first pressing is essentially 3,000 copies. And then once that is gone, and really you want to be selling that out in the first 6 months to a year, because after that point you start paying more for storing the excess print. So if you've used the excess print, everyone's a winner. So stock is then delivered to Utopia, who's a distribution partner, and they fulfill all the orders. So that's the BFI shop, that's Amazon, that's Rarewaves, that's everywhere where you buy your stuff, I'm sure. And then in relation to retail, what I also do is I put together all the campaigns. So if there's something not in a campaign, that's arguably my fault. If there's like stuff that you really love and it's in a 3 for 25, that's also me. So, and there's a 3 for 25 going on our stuff right now. And that can be a real variety. So you can have a campaign that's got literally 15 titles, because it might be something very specific, like, I don't know, French cinema or something. And we obviously don't have like 100 titles that would go in there. So that might be something for FOP or the BFI shop or someone like that probably. And then you'd have HMV, which will be 150 to 200 titles. And I have to go through all of our catalogue and work out what we can do, what we can't do. So if someone asks me, can I have Watership Down, for like £4? No, you can't. And 5? No. And it goes on and so forth. So I'll go through, eliminate the stuff that is clearly not going to go on campaign. And then what we're left with is what we'll put into store. So then we have to do a stock build. Well, I say I have to do the stock build. So that's like 500 to 1,000 units of maybe half of that campaign. So that might be 50 titles, 500 to 1,000 of every title. So I have to order all of that. So in context, 2023, we had 21 different campaigns of, like I said, real variety. So John touched on it briefly, but I would say the online community, and some of you in here might know me from being on Facebook. To say that's not actually my job to be on Facebook. And I kind of often try and answer as many questions as I can, as many queries as I get about titles and about why are we doing this and why are we not doing that, and can you license the Devils on Blu-ray? Or like the Silent Hitchcocks? Seriously, no. So there are some very, very strange things. The person who suggested that I release the Charlotte Church show also was quite keen for me to release the entirety of the Crystal Maze, which I thought was quite ambitious for one. But and now certain things are clearly never going to be released by us. I don't mean to burst anyone's bubble, but there are a lot of things that we are asked for that we do get to release, which is fantastic. So that could be something like Maeve, which we did, The Haunting of Julia, I Start Counting, Music Lovers, Mr. Topaz, Nil by Mouth, which was another one that took years to come to fruition, and the one and only Cooking Price-Wise. which I think a lot of people asked us for, probably not thinking that was ever actually going to happen. And now it has. And also, actually, people suggest things for extras, which have turned up on stuff, which is great. So we did the early Michael Powell, and that had 2 episodes of Riviera Revels, which I think someone had suggested in the Facebook group and said, oh, I know the BFI have got this in the archive. And I'm like, good to know. So it makes me look bad that I didn't know that. And that was, we got to put that on the release, which is great. So it is worth making suggestions, albeit realistic ones, preferably. So in summary, managing operations for this label is being involved from very first minute to the last minute. I mean, literally 5-7 years that you have it, I have to be on top of that title. And like I said, we have 564 active lines and 200,000 units right now. And like I said, printed parts, that's at Sony, and that's actually something that you have to be quite careful about. It's quite challenging. And I manage, so really the announcements involvement with managing packaging, manufacture of the whole catalogue, overseeing the delivery, distribution of stock, putting together the campaigns. And it is like firefighting. Luckily, it's not like actually being on fire, but it's very rewarding to see title through from the acquisition that John's doing right through to the release. It's great to see it when you've got it in your hand and you go, yeah, I did that.